The music of John Coltrane, Saida's Song Flute. Very pleased to welcome to KJNU Boulder, Denver, Amiri Baraka. Good morning, Amiri.
Yeah, how you doing?
Poet, playwright, legendary figure at this point, Amiri. Now that you're in your early 70s, you've gotten into that status.
Yeah, I know. And it's a pain, actually.
Amiri Baraka is here in Boulder as part of Naropa's summer program, and he gave a reading a couple of nights ago before an SRO crowd at Laughing Goat, and this afternoon at 1:30 at the PAC at Naropa, Amiri Baraka will be giving a talk about art, media, and propaganda. Jazz has been so much a part of your cultural background and inspiration, and we just heard Saida's Song Flute from John Coltrane. It was probably recorded 30, 40 years ago, late 50s. Yeah. And Coltrane has endured as few musicians have. What explains that?
Well, he was, searching. He was not someone who just is content to play to run the changes. He was trying to always find new ways to say things. And because, like the theologian said, that was his ultimate concern. So, and I think that the music that he made then was a reflection of those times, the turbulence, the searching, the experimentation. Now, the contemporary music tends to be less intense, less searching, less experimental, because we're in a backward period, politically. The art usually finds or uses the period itself as a reflection. The art is a reflection of what's going on. So, usually in times where there's a lot of backwardness, you understand the art itself tends to be passive a lot of times because they intimidate people. Like nowadays it's intimidated, like McCarthyism. That period between McCarthyism and now was turbulent because the people themselves were on the move.
You wrote an essay called Somebody Blew Up America. It's a poem, actually. And it was written when you were the poet laureate of the state of New Jersey. To understate it, this poem attracted an enormous amount of attention and criticism. Can you just briefly describe for listeners who are not familiar with it?
Actually, the poem was written a year before I was named poet laureate. The governor obviously was not a poetry reader, because I doubt whether I would have been named poet laureate if he knew my work, But once the poem, I read it at the Dodge Festival. Once I read it, people reacted to it, particularly some stuff I said about Israel, which they tried to conflate and make about Judaism or Jews. And so I was attacked, and still I'm being attacked. And every time I tried to say, well, why don't you put the poem on the wall on television, or let's have a town meeting, a town hall, or let's show this in the legislature, and let's debate line by line, and you tell me what you think is incorrect. They refused to do that. So this happened about 6 months after I had been named poet laureate, and the governor calls me and tells me, you got to resign, you got to apologize. I told him no, I wouldn't do it. And there's a little pamphlet that I published called I Will Not Resign, I Will Not Apologize. The irony is that a year later, the governor himself had to apologize and resign for having an adulterous affair with a gay person. And, he was supposed to be for gay rights, yet his reason for resigning was that he was gay. I could never understand that. The irony was that I sent him a telegram urging him not to resign, after he told me to resign. But so I always sign my stuff now, the last poet laureate of New Jersey.
Because the state legislature in Trenton stripped you of
No,
this
what they did,
position?
this is interesting, because they could not do that, because it would have been, ex post facto. They would have to go back in time to do that. So what they did was in the poet laureate position, you see, so that there is no more poet laureate in New Jersey. And I guess that was my role, to just destroy it, because they ended the poet laureacy. The next year, the governor himself resigned. So that whole period was like a disaster, according to many people. But what it was because the thing was questioning 911. It was questioning, the origins of that. I had written that about a month after 9/11 because we are in Newark where we can actually see those buildings over there. And so after being terrified, about a month later, I started to think, well, look, I mean, terror, black people have always been in terror. The slave trade, if nothing else, is terrorism. The lynchings in the South are terrorism, the segregation and discrimination. So I began to resent Bush, who at best is a hypocrite about everything. I began to resent his talking about this terror as if it was something novel and something only experienced by the United States under George Bush, you know. And that's when I wrote that poem. And I sent the poem around the world on the internet. October, '01. I sent that around all over the world. So it was about a year later before they really started to react.
And discussions, even to this day, around 9/11 and its origins and causes and any kind of criticism of Israel, these are taboo topics in American media.
Well, this is the thing. You cannot bomb the United States from the air. That's a myth. I mean, you cannot, if you at Boston, you understand what I mean? You have to file a flight plan. You say, I'm going from Boston to L.A. The minute you turn off that course, they're going to say to you from the ground, hey, what's the story? If you do not answer, there will be F-15s in your face. I was in the Air Force 2 years till they kicked me out. But they will be in your face in a matter of minutes. You cannot fly from Boston to the World Trade Center, not to Joe Jones's hick farm, but you cannot fly to the World Trade Center unmolested, without even a phone call. You cannot fly from Boston to the World Trade Center to the Pentagon without somebody asking you what you're doing. You cannot bomb the United States. So that's what I started thinking, and then I started going on the net, getting this information. And the crude thing is this. Anyone with a mainframe would know who died in the World Trade Center. You could go to the Israeli embassy and find out there was only 2 Israeli nationals, because I never was talking about Jews. American Jews died with us in the 9/11. But for somebody to make it impossible for you to criticize a foreign country or to raise questions about them is so peculiar. You know what I mean? It's just a striking kind of thing. That you're going to attack me for what? For asking questions? So that's what I was attacked for. And actually, the things they're attacking me for, I first read in Israeli newspapers. I read that in Haaretz and Yadiad Yedanat and Watan, the Jordanian television station. So it seems weird to me that I should be attacked for things that you can get off the net. And like I said, any of these newspapers has a mainframe. The state of New Jersey has a mainframe. I've got a little broken down computer. If I can get that kind of information, then you can get it much easier than I can.
There's a case here in Boulder of the University of Colorado, Professor Ward Churchill, who wrote an essay that very day of the attacks, and it was later published with extensive footnotes and documentation, Chickens Coming Home to Roost, about 9/11. He has been vilified and subjected to an enormous amount of scrutiny and political attack, and there is a move now by the university to strip him of his tenure status.
Yeah, first of all, I'm very, very aware of that. I followed that very closely. I communicated with him or tried to send an email, but again, it's like McCarthyism, only the next step. Here is a Supreme Court that 2 weeks ago just said that the knock and announce law for the police entering your home is struck down. That goes back to 13th century England. That means now this country is more backward than 13th century England, that the police do not have to knock and say, it's the police. They can just run in your home. So this kind of backwardness, like this attack on Ward Churchill, these university professors should be wary, because if they can fire a tenured professor, who's next?
You've had a long association with Allen Ginsberg recently around the country, here in Boulder as well. There have been celebrations of his famous poem, Howl. How did you first meet Allen Ginsberg?
I was in the Air Force at Strategic Air Command down in Puerto Rico. I was a weatherman and a gunner. and the Night Librarian, by the way. And Hal came out, and the Village Voice was just in its first issues. That's when soon-to-be Mayor Koch was a member of the board, as well as Norman Mailer. That was an interesting mix. And I saw reportage on Hal then, and I got interested in, because if you remember, the 50s was a time of very passive, very academic kind of poetry. And it seemed like you had to have a Greek or a Greek or a Latin, phrase before you could write the poem. 7 types of ambiguity. That whole period. So Allen's breakthrough was an important thing for me because it showed that you could use real language.
Let's listen to some of the opening verses of Howl, and I have to warn our listeners in this time of excessive Puritanism and hypercensorship that we're going to have to fade it out because of certain taboo words.
Yeah, tell them they have to go to cable TV if they want to see profanity.
Allen Ginsberg and the Kronos Quartet, Howl.
Howl for Carl Solomon. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo and the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats, floating across the tops of cities contemplating jazz, who dared their brains to heaven under the L and saw Mohammedan angels staggering on tenement roofs illuminated, who passed through universities with radiant cool eyes hallucinating Arkansas and Blake-like tragedy among the scholars of war, who were expelled from the academies for crazy and publishing obscene odes on the windows of the skull, who cowered in unshaven rooms in underwear, burning their money in wastebaskets and listening to the terror through the wall, who got busted in their pubic beards returning through the radar with a belt of marijuana for New York, who ate fire and paint hotels or drank turpentine in Paradise Alley gas, or purgatoried their torsos night after night with dreams, with drugs, with waking...
There, sparing you from the words that I'm sure none of our listeners in the Denver, Boulder area have ever heard. In what ways was Howell and Ginsberg's work liberating in terms of the language? And I'm thinking of what Bird and Diz and Train did for jazz in terms of pushing those frontiers, the audio frontiers.
Well, for poets, the Howl was a breakthrough not only because of the profanity, which was, like you said, we knew anyway, although those were times when you weren't supposed to say things like that, but it was that it was American speech. It was American language. It wasn't an iambic pentameter. We were going to John Donne again. But it was what Ginsberg always said, using, American speech and the breath phrase. You could hear an American voice and the rhythms, our native kind of rhythm, the rhythm of at that time, which sounded so fresh because it had been around us and with us so long. But when you wrote poetry, you were supposed to somehow sound like, you were in England somewhere. So that's what that was. And Alan was a relentless publicist for poetry, and talked about, William Carlos Williams and the whole question of the breath phrase and American speech. So that's what drew me at that time, because I was up against it as a young kid who wanted to write poetry but didn't want to write about the things that you could see in, say, the New Yorker magazine, or that kind of a clipped academic verse.
And here in Boulder, Allen Ginsberg and Ann Waldman established the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poets.
Right.
And you've been coming to Boulder for many, many years.
Yeah, I came here, close to the beginning. I think I came here just after Allen began to wear suits.
And ties.
Yeah. I mean, one day, I see this guy in his suit, I said, what's with you? What are you going to, a masquerade or something? He had gone out. I guess he was under the influence of the Buddhist thing that he got into. And he went out and bought a whole rack of suits from the Salvation Army. Suits, shirts, ties. And I think they probably told him, you got to look a little more respectable. So it was very funny. But Alan and I were very close because I respected him as an intellectual. See, I had spent my time down in Puerto Rico loading up because I thought that when I got back to New York, man, the world-class intellectuals would be there. Of course, I was mistaken, but Ginsberg was the closest thing to that. And an old friend of mine, Alan Polite from Newark, who had come over to New York and become a poet, a black guy. So I was drawn to that. And then from Puerto Rico, I spent all that time reading all that stuff to come here, and that Alan actually knew something about, in fact, the most knowledgeable person I knew about Western poetry. I mean, back to, you're talking about Blake and, Christopher Smart and the Provençal and all of that. That was Ginsberg.
Well, how is it for you in pretty much an all-white milieu to work? I mean, did you feel accepted?
You mean in the village?
Yeah.
Oh, well, see, this is post-McCarthyism. You had the sons and daughters of the immigrants, Italians, Jews, the Irish. If you look at that, you'll see the poor whites. And the first blacks to come into that. Not the first blacks, but more and more blacks to come into that. So we felt actually the camaraderie of resisting McCarthyism, backward, racist America. And there was a camaraderie in that. When that broke down for me was when, as the civil rights movement intensified and got to the point where then the politics came to a point where Malcolm X was assassinated, then I felt no longer able to be in that kind of milieu, and I split. That's when I moved to Harlem and started, the Black Arts Repertory Theater School, because when Malcolm X was murdered,
1965.
It struck me that they had declared war on black people, and I thought if you're going to declare war, I'm going to go back to where I need to be to fight that war, and that's what that was. But until then, what Alan called the era of good feeling, we all thought we had a kind of camaraderie against, racism and backwardness in America. Alan and I, as we grew older, separated ideologically. We were always friends, but we spent our time then arguing very fiercely. He wanted peace, I wanted war. So that was we became more estranged, but we were always friends to the end. That's interesting.
What do you mean that you wanted war?
Well, I was part of the Black Liberation Movement. I wanted to destroy the racism and the national oppression. I want, those years you remember of the Lyndon Johnsons and the Nixons, after Kennedy was killed, and then Malcolm X. See, for me, then the door to say good feeling had closed. Then it was a question of destroying those structures that actually could militate, that could kill a Kennedy, you understand, that could kill a Malcolm X, that later could kill a Bobby Kennedy, that could kill a Martin Luther King, that could kill a Medgar Evers. You understand what I'm saying? So then became... And then by 1958, you got the Montgomery bus boycott. 59, Fidel Castro going into 1960. I went to Cuba. I met Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Malcolm X, 1960, his first public appearance on television. SNCC, the student movement, starts February 1960. That's a whole different rush of alternative values presenting themselves.
Amiri Baraka on KJNU Boulder, Denver. I'm David Barsamian. Amiri, I'd love for you to read a poem that you brought along with you called Play Dat. It's dedicated to John Hicks and Hilton Ruiz. These are jazz musicians, right?
Yeah, they died just last month. Within, 2 weeks of each other. John Hicks died of internal hemorrhage. Hilton Ruiz was found dead in the street in New Orleans, and many of us think that he was murdered. So these were two good friends of mine, two close friends of mine, and two great pianists, and this is what this is about. Play that for John Hicks and Hilton Ruiz. Play that The inner tape, the collapse or rap, the strain, the hippest train. What name for the hours, the early or late towers, the quest, the undressed, all that mess, play that. We ain't where we been or gone or thought we got to then when we were the old men, the dots, the feeler, ugly stealers, the wheelers upon whom everything bent what was meant, what we spent to know or know we didn't know, for whom this world was a newspaper, a grapefruit, a spinning tomb of where and whom. For those of us who never missed trying to understand, for those among us who took a stand, who felt they could speak or sing for the land, man, for anybody who could say night or day, this is the way it was. For those we trust, for those who took a bust, who would open their mouths at the fiends and use profanity at the inanity, the insanity, would cuss for the whole of us. Whoever never doubted they were real and would take the fall, take the hit, appear surreal, vanish in the clannish discovery of our nut-like loyalties with minuscule royalties, heaped with insults and banality, who would dare to stare at the kings and uglier things and still open our mouths and tell jokes to rouse the sleepers, the next week stronger folks to turn from merely looking or booking and force dumbness on the dumb, ugliness on the ugly, expose the liars, extract their teeth, enlarge our beef, outline deceit, the clay on superpunks' feet. Those who could die before they cry, have their necks stretched with 666 hung on their sandals, accusing them of scandals of which the murderers themselves were the handles, all them, we as they ken, the babies, the armies and navies, for them was true, before or after and during pain, criminals reserved for you, for them, the glorious and the grim, who laugh with us, and wept the dry dusk of the accused, the dishonestly abused, the secret heroes, the banished, the vanished, the tarnished, the unstoppable screamers, we as under your will still as shrill. Wherever they try to take us out, some alley, anonymous circumstance, empty hill, we is the same. What call them whoever name, brought down by any game, or guilty lame, we is all the same, for those whose honest claim is life without Satan, or the craven without misdirection, the evil escape detection, play that, for us. For the people who would tell you what was really going down, who would give little ground, for those the beast would hound, play that, yeah, play that heavy vance, that switchblade funk, that Lydian pentatonic scale for red and black riders of the apocalypse, play that, signifying blue memory joint, that history narrating, unequivocating, maroon Lewis growling ducasonic hyperbole, play that, yeah, play that, and bring us from wherever we is and was and went, bring us back. Let it be a band collected from across the world. Let it be so hip even bad bush could be smoked, or Sharon would drown in the sticks trying to get out the way of what it say. Play that way. And whatever everything be, just get them notes out free. And on the scale, that tail, play it red, what history said. Wail it black, rhythm attack. Bring it blue so most peoples remember it, too. It gotta be hot, who like it or not, and boom da doom blown, the syncopate tone. It gonna be out, can't be stopped with that Afro-Latin raggedy tabla moan, that, yeah, that the way it was and be, that Asiatic Arab cry, that modal, what it is, God, if you is, double lighten and speak I am. What did I do? Answer to anybody's unasked future question. Like a plantation whisper transformed into Lenin's laughter, harmonies like Mao's essays on philosophy and Du Bois' question, how does it feel to be Nicolas Guillen and Amy Césaire? Langston could say if Margaret told Zora how Lorraine explained music like Lorca made or Dumas played, like the dues Malcolm paid, all improvisation, like an endless symphonic conversation. When Langston got hooked up with Beethoven and Sunhouse got the Book of the Seven Seals and the Sun Ra Cosmo Dialectic Orchestra got down and them strange marks on the page, what the whole sensible world could play, them notes was know-its. It was collective, improvised from the scores coming forth in the dawn of what I say, like a human hum where life come from, and we smoked it to the ground, made the world spirit sound. Hey now, went out that vout, that Aruni tune, that universal ensemble sound from the sun to the ground, like the soul was over our head and inside everybody where it gonna be, and we say, yeah, go ahead, right on, play that, yeah, play that.
Amiri Baraka, play that. All improvisations like an endless symphonic conversation.
Yeah. Hey, it's funny what you write when you in your poetic zone, like the ball players say.
I noticed that you wrote this on July 14th, 2003,
yeah.
Just a month before an extremely tragic event in your family, the murder of your daughter,
Yeah.
Shani.
Yeah, that actually that has sort of turned our lives upside down. You know, you could never get over that. I mean, she was 31 years old, All-American basketball player, Phi Beta Kappa, you know, cum laude, come back to her home to be a English teacher, mathematics teacher, French teacher, assistant coach of a state champion basketball team. When she got to be the head coach, they won the National Youth Games. A week later, she was murdered. You know, it was an insane thing. My wife and I would never. I mean, our family, our kids. You know, she had 4 brothers, 2 stepsisters. She got 4 other sisters. You know, and it has just destroyed us. You know, it's something that you never really recover from that. You know, you think that you get beyond that, and then it's like, you know, one afternoon you'll be sitting there, and suddenly there, you know, you're back in that. So it was very hard, and the city took it. It was hard for the city because she was a coach of young girls, you know, basketball players, track stars, and so they took to sitting on our porch every morning. We would, before early in the morning, we'd look out the door, and there would be little girls sitting on the steps, you know, and they'd be sitting there crying. The woman that coached with her actually had to go into the, you know, the ward there for about a month. She was so disturbed she had to actually go in the hospital. Yeah, it was, for that little town of 300,000 people, that was a shocking event, you know.
And you've dedicated a CD, the Shani Project, to your daughter,
Yeah,
Shani
right.
Baraka.
This is actually was the first of. It was supposed to be 2 CDs, but that was the first one. We haven't finished the second one.
And people can access this and information about you on your website, amiribaraka.com. That's right. amiribaraka.com. Amiri Baraka will be giving a talk this afternoon on art, media, and propaganda at 1:30 at Naropa Institute at 2130 Arapahoe here in Boulder. And I'd like to thank you very much for your time, Amiri Baraka. We're going to go out with John Coltrane, who, like Amiri Baraka, has taken many giant steps.
Giant steps, that's right.